from where. Oh, you know what?
Hmm.
I figured it out.
What's that?
I figured out that I had not hit go live. Once again, Andy screws it all up. All right. We should be live now.
We
All
should.
you missed was like pre-show banter. I was complaining about how I have no heat in my house because my boiler decided to take a shit in the middle of a Wisconsin winter. And I was complaining how the homeless people in this city have it better than I do tonight because at least they have a warming shelter. But because, oh, I have a house, I'm not welcome in the warming shelter. I just have to freeze in my icy tomb of a house.
Don't they know that people with massive houses are needy too? Damn it.
My house ain't that big. It's pretty middle class.
I mean,
I could definitely fit the entire homeless population in this house. But that's what, like 10 people?
uh, we. Any listeners out there know the answer to that? Let us know.
Yeah, what's the population of homeless in Stevens Point, Wisconsin?
Yeah. Um, and I had wanted to say that last week's episode, uh, it kind of came to an abrupt stop because we were going a little bit long, maybe almost, and there was literally one thought I wanted to go out on, but I hadn't formed it yet before we stopped. The thought that I wanted to go off on for last week's episode was I think Dana Carvey and his comedic brilliance and his awesomeness, especially in the 90s, was underrated pretty much the same way that having booby posters up in your bedroom was overrated. That's kind of the point that's kind of the juxtaposition I was going for. And when I say booby posters, I don't mean nudies. I mean just those posters of Pamela Anderson and Carmen Electra that everybody had. But I don't know, just that's that's my 2 cents. I think they were a little bit overrated, the same way Dana Carvey was underrated.
And again, I don't see the difference between having a booby poster and having a Iron Maiden poster.
Uh,
I think it's all good. It's all just as long as the wood paneling of your bedroom isn't showing, that's all that matters. Just cover that shit up. It's fine.
we need a sound effect because paneling on the walls is an 80s thing. We don't talk about those. Talking about 80s things here is
You think we had a new house that I lived in? We lived in a fucking trailer. That was all wood paneling.
jeez. Um but
And I did have a booby poster or two up in my room, as you should as a young teenage boy.
because then your family, especially your dad, know that you're not gay.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of important. And while we're talking about it and while I'm thinking about it, I have to wonder, Bob, my mom's boyfriend who lived with us for a large part of my childhood, always gave me a hard time, always expected the worst from me. Would would things have been different? Would he have treated me better and been more of a mentor and more involved in my goings on
If he thought you weren't gay.
if he had a little bit more faith that I was I don't know, one of the boys and and I had proven that by maybe having a Carmen Electra poster up in my room. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe that would have changed how I interacted with him, and maybe by way of the butterfly effect, that would have changed the course of events to where I'd be a totally different person right now. You can't help but wonder about that kind of stuff.
The type of person that would have booby posters up behind you and not King of the Hill and Wayne's World and Weird Al. And
And would make fun of a 42-year-old man for wearing a t-shirt of Beavis and Butthead wrestling each other. Maybe. Who knows?
who's more mature, the teenage boy with the Carmen Electra poster or 40-year-old Andy wearing a Beavis and Butthead t-shirt?
I will not be ripped on by a guy who wore a t-shirt last week saying he's a tool.
You. This is why teachers didn't try to molest you as a kid. See, if you would have been more of the Carmen Electra booby guy, who knows what could have happened?
You wore a tool t-shirt last week. You advertised that you're a tool. That's what's not to be made fun of.
And I didn't get hit on by any of my teachers either.
Ah, sucks.
That sucks. I know it sucks when you look back and realize you've never been molested by a teacher. That's awful. Anyway, I'm going to play this intro music here.
Hmm.
You ready?
I am ready.
All right. You said you didn't have anything for an intro?
I have
I
one.
I got something for an
Okay,
intro.
yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the Mindful 90s podcast, the only podcast that tackles every 90s topic from Tanya Harding's wedding night taping to Dana Carvey's shirtless lactating. Huh? How about that?
Shirtless lactating for the win. Hey, thank you.
Hey, you're welcome.
Appreciate that.
I completely ripped that off from Biggest Problem in the Universe. They always do a little rhyme, and it's fun.
They do,
So
yeah.
why don't we just do a little rhyme? It is fun.
Okay. Challenge accepted.
Where else are you going to hear anything rhyme with lactating? That's only going to happen on this show.
I think you're I think you're right. Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant.
It was pretty good.
I'm a poet. All right.
Yeah, man.
What are our topics tonight? What do you got? Do you want to go first?
Do I want to go first?
You may as well.
Okay.
Or I think I went first last time.
But at the same time, my topics are kind of all together because it's one topic, but it's also three, and they all meld together. So, do you want to go first?
Are you just going to do them all like in one long?
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
It'll work. The way I have it in my head, it'll work. I think.
All right.
You're like, I always hate the way you have things in your head, so I think it won't work.
We'll let the audience decide.
Fair enough.
All right. The first topic that I have
Mhm.
is the Green Bay Packers winning the Super Bowl in 1996.
96. Nice.
I think if you don't live in Wisconsin, if you are not a Packer fan, you don't know how big of a deal this was for everybody in Wisconsin when this happened.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I have people who come here and from around the country who will come in, stay at my house, friends, whatever, from no matter where. They're always blown away by how much Packer shit there is absolutely everywhere. You go to the grocery store and you have former Green Bay Packers selling you beer. There's Packer shit on everybody's car. There's Packer signs in everybody's yards, Packer flags.
Title towels.
You might not know this, but in Wisconsin, we put the Packer flag above the U.S. flag. That's how important the Packers are.
Right on.
Now, here's a little bit of context. Up until the Packers won the Super Bowl showed up in the Super Bowl, they had not been to a Super Bowl outside of the first two. Everybody remembers, we don't, obviously, but everybody knows the Packers are a championship team. They are America's team. They really are. It's not Dallas. They are God's team. Outside of those first two Super Bowls, they did jack shit. They were a garbage team. Any of us who grew up, this is pre 90s even, there was no hope of the Packers even making it to the playoffs.
The quarterback before Favre was who, Jim McMahon? Is that correct?
No, Domikowski.
Domikowski. Okay. Yeah.
The only time the Packers went to the playoffs prior to their appearance in 96 was in 1982, and that was the year that the entire NFL went on strike. So there were, 8 games that season?
I did not know that.
So I think there were 8 or 9 games that they didn't play. And the Packers just happened to make it to the playoffs that year, but it doesn't really count because it was just a shitty strike. It was all a lot of scabs playing.
Yeah.
So, if you were a kid growing up in the 80s, like really young, before everything changed when Brett Favre came into the league, or not when he came into the league, when he came to the Green Bay Packers. That's when everything changed for us. As a young kid, we would watch Packer games every week, obviously, as you do in Wisconsin. Uh, Going to church isn't that important, but making sure you catch the Packer game is important. And we did. We watched them all. As a kid in the 80s, watching Packer games, all you could do is watch them eat shit week after week after week. This was just a normal state of affairs. You didn't watch, you prayed for them to have a game against the Patriots or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Indianapolis Colts, because at least those teams might be able to eke out a win against those teams. They just weren't good teams. None of them. They were all shitty teams back then.
Okay.
And there was a guy named Don Mikowski. This was the first quarterback I remember playing. And this is, I don't know, like the latter half of the 80s. He was, I don't know, he was fine. I guess he was average, but he didn't do anything with the team. There was nothing that ever happened with that team. They went through coaches every other year, it seems. I remember Bart Starr. Bart Starr might have been the coach of the Packers, the first coach that I remember watching Packer games. And there was Forrest Gregg, Lindy Infante.
Lindy Infante. I was gonna say, yeah.
He was the one right before Holmgren, I think. I'm pretty sure he was the one right before Holmgren. So all we do up until the early 90s is watch our team get destroyed week in and week out. That was just what it meant to be a Packer fan. It was a very humbling experience.
Which is why I was a Bengals fan, 49ers fan, because I like their color schemes.
But not just you, though. A lot of people in Wisconsin, a lot of kids, they would always declare that they had other favorite teams. It was never the Packers. Like, my favorite team was always the Packers. I didn't have another favorite team. There were kids who liked the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys were pretty tough in the throughout the 90s, but especially in the early 90s.
The Emmett Smith, Michael Irvin.
Yeah. And then there was the Buffalo Bills. So it was the Dallas Cowboys and Buffalo Bills in the early 90s who dominated the AFC and NFC.
Bills went to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row?
They went, 4 years in a row, and they lost all of them. So you had kids who were San Francisco 49ers fans or Miami Dolphins fans. They were just basically loser sellouts who couldn't stomach the fact that they were rooting for a loser team for whatever reason.
I was one of them. Yeah.
Well, you don't deserve to wear the apparel like this. Anyway,
I've earned it. I'll tell you why later.
We'll chime in. Just go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I've been to a Packers. I told you about this. I've been to a Packers game on like January 3rd when it was about 0 degrees outside, and I thought I was gonna die from hypothermia. I feel like I redeemed myself. I feel like that was my what's it called, hazing or indoctrination into proving that I'm a Packers fan.
But that, like, Packers fans just do that as a normal course of action. You're treating it like a
But you know how much I hate being cold.
you know those weird camps that middle-aged men go to bond with other men by doing a lot of exercise and crawling over gravel and pretending they're tough for a weekend? That's what this reminds me of. Well, I bonded with other Packer fans because I froze with them that one day. I've been to lots of games like that, and it never even occurred to me that I was cold because the fire of fandom burning in my heart melts all the snow underneath you. And you're not cold. You can't be cold.
That is some hot fire.
In fact, the last game that tub of shit, Mike McCarthy, that unworthy useless pustule who squandered a decade of Green Bay Packer greatness. I was at his last game.
Oh,
They
wow.
played against the Cardinals. I think that was wonderful.
Sure.
Anyway, so Don Mikowski, he's the Packers quarterback. They had one good year that I remember, and I think it was 87 or 88. They had a 10-win season that year. They still didn't go to the playoffs.
The whole Bears Super Bowl shuffle thing was 85.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple years after that.
Yeah. So Green Bay had just a shitty year after shitty year after shitty year. And there was, even when they had a decent year, a 10-6 year, that's a good year. Even then, they didn't go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I probably should have looked it up to see who went to the playoffs that year. Not Super Bowl, playoffs. They didn't even make it to the playoffs that year. Anyway,
Even when they had a 10-6 season.
yeah, which is bizarre. Most 10-6 teams will make it. So Don Mikowski had nothing to show. He had that one good season. And the other thing about being a Packer fan back then is every time Don Mikowski would get hurt and the backup would come in, like Trent Dilfer, remember that name?
I don't.
There's another one that's right on the tip of my tongue that I can't think of right now. But they would come in and have these also horrible games, and the fans would be so impressed at the horrible game that the backup played because Don Mikowski just had 5 horrible games in a row that they're willing to give anybody a chance at quarterback just so they don't have to suffer the indignity of watching a Don Mikowski play football or try to play football. But he was like a big shot in his own mind. He was a pretty good looking guy. He did a lot of local commercials and things like that in Green Bay. Now, everything changed when this nobody ended up coming into a game for Don Mikowski. Mike Holmgren was so pissed off at him. It was this is 93 by this time. Like, Don Mikowski's been eating shit for years at this point. They're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who back then were a division rival of the Green Bay Packers. The divisions were structured different back then, and Tampa Bay was in the NFC North for whatever reason, because they were an expansion team and they had to stick them somewhere.
Okay.
So Mike Holmgren is so pissed off at Don Mikowski because and by the way, Tampa Bay is one of the shittiest teams in the league at this time. Green Bay fell behind 17-0. Mike McCarthy benches Don Mikowski in the second half and puts Brett Favre out there. He's like, all right, kid, let's see what you can do. Go out there. So Brett Favre goes out there, and his first pass, the first pass he ever threw, do you know, can you name the receiver of Brett Favre's first ever pass?
Sterling Sharp.
That's a really good guess because Sterling Sharp was an amazing quarterback or wide receiver who played for the Packers back then. The answer is Brett Favre. He bounced the ball off of a Tampa Bay Buccaneer back into his own hands and tried running with it, but was tackled for a 7-yard loss.
Okay.
Now, his first pass ever with the Green Bay Packers was to himself for a 7-yard loss.
And he was so not nervous that he had the wherewithal to act quickly enough to catch his own pass.
I think he was nervous the first couple of games because here's the other part of it. But
he caught his own pass. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
But the next game, they ended up losing that game 17-3. So at least Favre did enough in that game to give him 3 points, which is what Don Mikowski never did.
Yeah, okay.
The next game is against the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is the one most Packer fans remember. I can't even remember how old I was, but I remember being on the school bus the day after this game and talking to everybody because everybody was so excited after this game. Cincinnati Bengals, Don Mikowski gets hurt. It's an injury that's going to last 4 or 5 weeks. Brett Favre comes in. it's not a great game. He fumbles the ball like 4 times in that game. He's clearly nervous to be out there.
Sure.
But the game comes down to the Packers are down by a touchdown with a minute left in the game. Brett Favre leads the Packer. They start on their own 8-yard line, go all the way down the field, score a touchdown, win against the Cincinnati Bengals. Everybody's like, my God, this guy's a hero. Because again, the mindset of Packer fans back then was any rookie quarterback that can show even a modicum of discipline and talent out there was going to be the guy that got thrown into the game. That's where we're all at.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter that the guy had fumbled the ball 4 times and did shit the game before. Everybody was excited by the fact that he led the team down the field and actually beat the Bengals. They actually won. Mike Holmgren was impressed. The Packers coaches were impressed enough to where they kept Brett Favre in. He continues to play through the 93 season, continues to win in the 93 season, even though he's throwing interceptions and fumbling the ball quite a bit. He's still pulling out wins, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Packer fans are starting to show up. And the other thing was nobody could pronounce his name. At first, everybody thought it was Favor. Everybody thought his name was pronounced Favor, and they would bring these big signs to Packer games that say, all in favor, say aye. Yeah, it makes no sense.
Yeah, technically.
But nobody knew. Don Mikowski finally heals, and he's ready to come back. But you know what? He's done. His career is fucking over now because this upstart came in and started winning a bunch of games. So in 93, for the first time ever in my life that I had ever seen, they finally made it to the playoffs. Finally.
Okay.
They ended up winning the first game. They played the Lions. They ended up winning that game. They went to play.
Those were the Barry Sanders days.
Yeah. Yep. They ended up playing Dallas, got absolutely destroyed. Again, Dallas is a Super Bowl team at this time. Green Bay is not.
Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin. Those 3, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Insane.
And everybody, like nobody was mad that they lost against the Cowboys in the playoffs. Everybody was just like, wow, we had a great season. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
They haven't even been to the playoffs for 10 years, longer than that technically, because the 82 season doesn't really count.
The scab season, yeah.
And for kids, this was the first time we had ever seen our team finally go to the playoffs, which was exciting. So we're excited about them.
Your dad was probably so happy he let you have a beer that day.
My dad hates football. He doesn't give a shit about it.
Crap.
My stepdad, on the other hand, he was a big football fan. I think that's why we were all football fans, because he had to watch the game every single week. And so we were indoctrinated into the club.
Right on.
Into the cult of cheese, which I'm happy to be there. The next year, kind of the same thing. They have a good season. Brett Favre, he's starting to, I think his second year in the league, he actually becomes MVP. I think in 94, maybe it was 95 and 96 he had MVP seasons.
Yeah.
Point is, we have a team to cheer for now.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing.
He's good, man.
They would always go out. I think Dallas kicked it. They made it to the playoffs the next 3 years. Or the next 2 years, they ended up getting kicked out by Dallas. No, 93, 94, 95. All 3 of those seasons, they got kicked out of the playoffs by Dallas, by the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Finally, 96, they make it to the playoffs. They steamroll everybody. By this time, we have all the guys that made a super, like Green Bay's defense back then, I think was ranked like number 5 overall in history or something ridiculous.
Reggie
like
White,
that.
right?
Yeah. So Reggie White was playing by
Gilbert Brown.
Yep. So they had one of the top ranked defenses going into the Super Bowl that year. And of course they won. They absolutely trounced the New England Patriots. Here's the thing. After years of watching your team just eat shit week after week after week, and finally, they get to the Super Bowl, the greatest event in sporting history. I ended up watching it at my friend's house because, like I said, my dad's not, he doesn't give a shit about football.
Yeah.
My friend whose house I was at, he doesn't give a shit about football. Him and his dad and his brother, they don't give a shit about football. So I end up watching this Super Bowl appearance with my friend's mom. We're the only ones sitting out there cheering for him and watching the game.
Well,
Nobody else cared.
was she hot?
No, no, no.
Did she at least bring good snacks?
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, oh yeah, we had all the snacks and sody pop we could want.
Heck yeah.
And when they're announcing the players and they're coming out on the team, I actually teared up. I was like, I can't believe they made it this far. I literally became a woman and got emotional. Like I didn't cry, but I definitely teared up and I was like, I can't believe it.
You were 16, 17?
No.
Wait.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
16. Yeah, I would have been like 16. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm just like, I'm so happy they're here.
Yeah.
Shed some tears.
That's
And of course, they ended up winning. And then it became the greatest event in Wisconsin. What else do we have? We have winter. We're fucking cold. We're always freezing. Even when we have uh, heat and natural gas and boilers, we can't even count on that most of the time. And it was a beautiful, beautiful event in every way.
Yeah.
I don't care how beautiful you think your wedding ever was. It was nothing compared to this. If you're Catholic and you thought your child had a beautiful confirmation, no, they didn't. It was nothing compared to the glory of the Green Bay Packers walking out onto a Super Bowl field ready to dominate.
It was a poopy diaper in comparison. I get you. I get you.
It was an absolutely stunning event. What that did was that started a 30-year reign of Packer greatness to where now, if the Packers lose a regular season game, I'm like, oh, fuck these motherfuckers. They fucking suck. They don't deserve anything.
Yeah.
And I have to sit back and remember the days of Don Mikowski.
Yeah.
I thought we were going back there with Jordan Love this year, but even that turned out not to be the case at all.
Nobody thought so for the first half of this season, but yeah, it ended up not being the case.
And I think it is very difficult for people who aren't Packer fans, who are maybe Miami Dolphins fans, who, so what, they lost a game. What, now you get to go outside in your 72-degree weather and chill out with martinis. Who gives a fuck? Like, we have nothing else going on here. We have cheese, beer, and Packers. That's it.
Yeah. Did you ever have a Gilbert Brown burger?
Yeah, of course.
What was it?
It was like a double Whopper with tomato. I don't remember if there were pickles on it, but there was extra stuff. If there were pickles, I would have had the pickles taken off them. But I think there was
Weirdo.
like extra mayo or something, like it was, or extra cheese or something, like whatever it was. But it was a double Whopper with extra
with lots of fixings.
stuff. Yeah,
Right on.
Yep.
That's cool.
It was really messy.
I don't think I ever had one because that was Burger King then.
Yeah.
We almost never went to Burger King or McDonald's. We were always Hardee's, and I always wanted a Monster Burger. But yeah, the Gilbert Burger. I remember seeing the commercials for it all the time. Now I kind of want to go on YouTube and find one. Back in the 90s, I remember being so baffled as to why we had a football team in Green Bay. I would ask people, and finally somebody told me, like, well, that's where football started. I'm like, yeah, but why? Why did football start in Green Bay, a city that only has 100,000 people?
Did it start in? I don't think it started in Green
Well,
Bay.
I mean, I think they kind of meant it figuratively, like we were like one of the teams that were the
like the Wisconsin football team started in Green Bay.
It just like
because the Green Bay Packers, I don't think, came into the league until, what was it, 1920 or 1921 or something like that. I think 21 was their 100-year anniversary.
Really?
Or maybe it was, no, it was 21. I think it was 2021 was their 100-year anniversary.
If anybody knows the answers to these questions about football history, please chime in.
Oh, everybody's got Google at their disposal. Somebody will have the answer.
Yeah, but we're giving somebody a chance to flex about their Wisconsin knowledge. I mean, come on. Um,
So that was it. I just wanted to share that moment of greatness because it's cold and literally nothing this week is going right for me. Literally nothing. I should have canceled the podcast because we're probably streaming right now to nothing. Uh, I probably fucked this up somehow.
there's a chance. Who knows?
So,
Did YouTube give you a notification that we're on?
oh yeah, yeah. Oh no, it's all good. My fortunes are starting to look up. I'm starting to come out of the Don Mikowski side of the season or the week and enter into the Brett Favre side of the week. I think finally starting to come out of it. But it got me thinking about how amazing it was. And again, if you weren't a Packer fan at that moment in time, there's no possible way you can understand what I'm saying. But it was an event in the 90s and it was bigger than Desert Storm. And I'll conclude with that.
Well, wait, I wanted to add a PS onto there because I really want to bring down the mood because I think that's important. Wasn't it the very next year when we went to the Super Bowl and we lost?
I don't want to talk about that. I'm feeling good. I got the good mojo going on. It didn't occur to you there's a reason I ended with the 1996 Super Bowl appearance? I just wanted to talk about my topic was the Packers winning the Super Bowl. That's what it was. It wasn't the Packers losing the Super Bowl. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Since you brought it up, yeah, they did. Yeah, they fucking lost. And you know what? I went into a 3-month depression after that. Like I shit you not. It was bad. For 3 months.
Oh, really? Okay.
And not only that, I didn't even watch football for the entire next season. I have no idea what happened in the 98 season
Oh my
because
God.
I didn't fucking watch any football that year.
I wasn't expecting that response.
Yeah.
All I really wanted to say was the next day, Monday at school, after the Packers winning and the Packers losing the Super Bowl, talk about different vibes at
Oh, yeah,
school.
I'm sure.
The vibe on that Monday after we lost, it was like all of school was one big funeral all day. For real. It was crazy. I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty sure I overheard a kid telling the teacher that he didn't do his homework and the teacher said she didn't care.
As she should. That's a the acceptable response.
It's absolutely. We were in mourning and grieving. But hey, yeah, man, for the majority of the last 30 years, it has been the expectation that we just make it to the playoffs because that's what we do. We're the Packers.
Yeah. The Packers should have been in the Super Bowl way more times than the 3 appearances they've made between Favre and Rodgers.
Right.
They should have been in the Super Bowl in 2003, 2006, I want to say. Uh, Aaron Rodgers should have been to the Super Bowl 3 or 4 times, but that pile of shit, Mike McCarthy, held that team back, held them back from, and the same thing he's doing to the Dallas Cowboys today. Dallas Cowboy fans know exactly what I'm talking about.
The internet has made this known. Yes. Um, uh, do we want to play the Diley message now, or do you want to save that for later?
Which message is that? I didn't put one on here.
Oh, I was gonna say it's in the folder. Um,
Uh,
I suppose I should have ran that past you.
yeah,
Maybe
always run that past me
maybe we can.
because I want to put it on the thing here.
Okay.
Is it 005?
Yeah.
Hold on a second. I'll see if I can set this up real quick.
Okay. Uh, this week's episode is brought to you by. No, it's not. But this week I am drinking Point Oktoberfest beer. It is delicious, and I'm glad I have it. It's warming me. It's warming me with all the warmth of a jack-o'-lantern that somebody set on fire and kicked down the street.
Wait, what
And
do
I
you
mean that. I mean that in a good way.
Point Oktoberfest?
Yeah.
You should get a sponsorship. Don't give them free advertising. What are you doing? You got to call them up and be like, hey, give us $10 and I'll show this on a podcast stream to all 6 of our viewers. Make them pay for that shit.
600. Um, so yeah, as I'm not going to start on my topic yet, but I will explain that I'm going to be talking a little bit about wrestling, and I know I've podcasted in the past, and I've mentioned wrestling, and some of my friends have given me the feedback, oh, I hate wrestling. I don't want to listen to you talking about wrestling. I assure you, I'm mostly going to be talking about people related to wrestling. I'm not going to be talking about wrestling.
Are you talking about tonight?
Yeah. So I'm
Well,
not.
just get into it. Just start talking about it.
It's going to start with me telling a story, a Bob story, another Bob story, and it's going to be a story about him taking us to see a wrestling show, and then I'm going to talk about the 2 wrestlers that were in the main event of that wrestling show and what I thought of them in the 90s versus what I think of those guys now. That's all of my topics for this week, is talking about that that wrestling show in the 90s and
Why do people
how I
buy
feel about those
bikini
2
model?
wrestlers. Um
Fuck.
so
You know why? I remember why I don't do this. Because we can't hear this shit.
oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
Keep talking.
I was or
That's
just
right.
or just save the daily message for the end of the show or however you want to do it.
Well, I mean, pushing it back's not going to help anything.
Yeah, I suppose. Um I keep saying so there's a wrestling event called the Royal Rumble that happens at the end of every January. And the winner of it's a 30-man battle royal, and the winner of it gets to face whoever's the champion at WrestleMania a couple months later. Well, in 1992, the Royal Rumble was on January 24th. And I mean, back then I didn't know that. Back then I didn't know when any of this stuff happened. Back then in the early 90s, I would like I would just wait for mom to take us to Video Madness or Preferred Video and be nice enough to let me rent a wrestling tape, and I would just grab a random one based on whether or not the cover of it looked cool. And over the course of time, I eventually pieced together the timelines of when these wrestling shows happened. And so, anyways, to pivot here a little bit, so I had excuse me. So Bob was my mom's boyfriend who lived with us, and his parents lived in Hoka, Minnesota, which was just a couple miles from La Crosse, Wisconsin. And one time, it was a Friday in late January, and me and my brother got off school, and my mom was like, Bob called and said that just a second, this might be our tech support guy letting us know that something's wrong. Nope, we're good.
You gotta hide that thing. You can't keep interrupting your story. That totally throws off the entire momentum.
What are you talking about? Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna make you leave it in your car next week.
um, and so me and my brother, we get off school on a Friday in January, and my mom says Bob called and said that his brother, who lives in La Crosse, got free tickets to this wrestling show, and it's that night. Um, Mom's like, Bob's gonna try as hard as he can to get off work, and to get off work at a reasonable time. We're all gonna pack up the car, and we're gonna go on a trip this weekend to go visit Bob's family in Hoka, and we're gonna go to this wrestling show while we're at it. Free wrestling tickets, why not? It sounded like a pretty good idea. The weird thing was, I think
The
Bob,
worst part is just going with your parents.
yeah, kinda, and I think Bob was I think he was homesick, and I think he was kind of a mama's boy, but he didn't want to admit it. So I think he was always looking for an excuse to have to go visit his family. I think that's what this was really all about. And the wrestling thing was just kind of shoehorned in as an excuse. So Bob worked for a trucking company,
Like
and
his mom got him the free tickets.
it it was his brother that got him the free tickets, but he was just very family oriented. I think he was homesick like a mofo, to be totally honest with you. Anyway, because we went to La Crosse or Hoka way too often. It was more than 2 hours away, and those trips were boring as hell, dude. I memorized all the state capitals because of that, because of reading the re
Atlas.
reading the atlas and listening to Weird Al on my Walkman was all I did for every lacrosse drive, uh, Hoka drive. Um, so Bob ends up getting off work not only not on time, but a little bit later than he normally would. I think it's because the weather was really crappy that day, and it was making like I think it made some of the trucks run late, and he had to like process their paperwork and do whatever. And so he gets home, and it's suddenly a mad rush to get in the car and go to Minnesota. And him and my mom are like debating about whether or not we should even do it because the roads are complete garbage. It's like a blizzard happening. Nope, we still have to go because this was the plan, and we're gonna go
Because he's got to see mom.
because he's got to see his mom. It was a plan that had only existed for a couple hours, but it was we don't want to waste these tickets. I mean, they were free tickets that you didn't even know existed until a couple hours ago. And of course, from the time Bob got home to the time we got on the road and started driving to La Crosse was probably like 10, 15 minutes of us getting stuff together. But of course, he was yelling at me and my brother for doing everything too slow. It's like, good God, man. What? Even as a 10-year-old, I'm like, I got a funny kind of feeling that he's kind of displacing his fucking issues on me. Like, I don't think this is my fault nearly as much as he thinks it's my fault that we didn't leave in 5 minutes instead of 15. And then we get on the road and we're just,
Yeah,
it's,
but kids are slow as shit.
I mean,
And especially when you're in a hurry. That's it's rough.
we fumble more.
It's rough
I,
dealing with that shit.
yeah.
Anybody with kids knows.
And then
Here I am taking Bob's side again.
it- we probably ran late because I was looking for my boots. You know what I mean? Those $170 boots.
Mm,
That's probably what the real issue was now that I'm thinking about it.
you forgot him at school that day.
So we're driving and we're going just half the speed limit because that was the line of traffic. That was the flow of traffic was just everybody going slow in this blizzard. The mood on this 3.5, almost 4 hour drive was just the absolute worst. We're getting to the point where we're wondering if we're going to get there and there's going to be no show left to see. It's all so weird, and I have no idea who I'm going to be seeing wrestle. But of course, you know me, 10 years old. I hope the Ultimate Warrior's there. I hope the Ultimate Warrior's there, and the Legion of Doom, and not Hulk Hogan.
And Jose Canseco.
right,
He's like their headliner.
right. Jose Canseco versus Jake the Snake. Um, and we finally get there. We finally get to our seats. They are the absolute worst nosebleeds. There
Mm.
might have been one or two rows behind us. That's what you get for free tickets, I guess. But there were empty seats in front of us, which baffled me. I'm like, this is all very weird. All of it was
What was the venue even
it,
sold out?
it was
Was it
the
really
lacrosse
packed?
center and it was not sold out. I have to wonder if a lot of people who had tickets just didn't go because of the weather.
Mm.
Late January, man, in Wisconsin. We get there and there's no match happening, but people haven't left yet. So it's like, okay, it must be in between matches. And the ring announcer comes out and says that your main event, and me and my brother look at each other like, main event, there's one match left. We made it for one match. It's like, oh my God. If it wasn't for the fact that we were going this way as part of a 2-part
Should have
trip,
been faster getting ready, like Bob said.
we could
What are
have
you
made
taking all that time for?
we could have maybe saw one more match if we would have just had our bags packed ready to go. I think you're right. And the main event, I had no idea who it was going to be. You ready? I didn't tell you ahead of time. I told
No,
you I was going to surprise you with this one. The main event ended up being Ric Flair versus Roddy Piper for the World Heavyweight Championship.
that's not uh that's not shitty.
That
That's
is
a pretty good fucking matchup,
that is not shitty.
especially when you're a 10-year-old kid.
As a 10-year-old, I realized this is actually pretty cool. This will be some pretty decent bragging rights because these two guys are legendary names.
Mhm.
You know, that much I knew. I was a little disappointed that it wasn't the Ultimate Warrior. Little disappointed that it wasn't I don't know, bigger, buffer guys, but it was still really dope. I was really stoked. Um yeah, Roddy
Did you
Piper,
have wrestling guys on your wall?
um I had wrestling posters.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, Legion of Doom hung over my bed at that age. Yeah, absolutely. It was like a 4-fold or an 8-fold poster for sure.
No
Uh,
Carmen Electra. No half naked Carmen Electra, but half naked
buff, oiled
chisel.
up,
Ah, all right. Anyway,
intense
I was
dudes.
just curious.
Oh, I know. And the match ended with Roddy Piper getting Ric Flair on his shoulders and spinning him around, doing the whole helicopter thing, accidentally kicks the referee's head and knocks him out. I'm doing air
Mm.
quotes here. Piper had him down for the 3 count. It was one of those count to 100, type of things. By
It
the
doesn't matter because the ref's unconscious.
right,
Yeah,
Piper goes to revive the ref. Flair goes and grabs the belt, knocks Piper out with it. That's exactly when the ref comes to,
of course.
counts the win. Flair retains. I found out later that Flair had become champion at the Royal Rumble. This would have been 5 days prior. I'm like, oh, wow, that's really neat. I managed to see a title match 5 days after one of the biggest events of the wrestling calendar year. Um, so that was pretty cool. Roddy Piper versus Ric Flair. Now, like I said, this was late January 92. And back then, those guys were not my favorite wrestlers. I did like Roddy Piper and I did appreciate Ric Flair to some degree. But I guess this is the part where I talk about,
Well, Ric Flair, even today, is still pretty famous.
yeah, for sure. Some rapper made a song called Ric Flair Drip, and it's got millions of streams on Spotify.
I think he inspired a lot of people.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think he
He was
banged
a
a lot of people.
he was a great heel.
Yeah, no, yeah, he was. It's weird because let's see. I didn't okay, let me start here. I didn't really like Ric Flair all that much because I was a sucker for the good guy bad guy dynamic.
Except Hulk Hogan.
Oh yeah, except Hulk Hogan. Just because I thought he was so fake and so hammy. Uh, his Ric Flair, Ric Flair was like the quintessential bad guy to a certain degree. He always always cheated, was always shameless about his cheating, and when he came to WWF, he was already famous for having wrestled for other companies. He wrestled for the NWA, which used to be bigger, and his main rivalry was against Dusty Rhodes. And these guys, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, had a rivalry for years. And you needed to be a very cookie cutter good guy and a very cookie cutter bad guy in case people in attendance didn't watch your weekly show. They needed to know the night of why they should love you and why they should hate you. That heat or that love needed to grow from nothing that
Mm.
evening, right?
Hmm.
So Ric Flair was that very cookie cutter bad guy, and then he took that with him to the WWF when he went there in the early 90s. And I didn't really see what the big deal was because I was a little kid who didn't know any of his lore, and I wouldn't have really cared all that much anyways. I just look at this guy and I'm like, he's not very buff. He's not very tall. What was I body shaming him? Yes, I was. I absolutely was.
Well, how was Roddy Piper? Was he buff and tall?
He was a little buffer and a little taller than Ric Flair, but not by much. Only
I
by a little bit.
I was always surprised by how flabby most wrestlers looked.
Yeah. Um,
You expect these guys to be chiseled gods. Most of the time, they weren't.
about I mean, it got to the point in the mid '90s when. Well, no, I take that
When
back.
the steroid fat took over and
Yeah.
just kind of covered all the muscles.
And that's also one of the reasons why Roddy Piper was never one of my favorites. I'm like, he's interesting, but number one, he's not all that buff, not all that impressive to look at. So it made it slightly less believable that he was like an imposing figure of
He wore
dominance.
a kilt.
He wore a kilt. He
That
played
was
he
cool.
played bagpipes. He had his own show called Piper's Pit. It was like his own segment on the wrestling shows. He was an interesting fellow. He he had a he had a quote that goes, "Just when you think you know all the answers, I change the questions." I appreciate that so much more now as a philosophy nerd than I did when I was 10 years old and didn't know why didn't know why that was so clever. And yeah, man, to be honest, I was just a total body shamer back in the early 90s. I was a horrible bigot of a little kid body shaming these wrestlers for,
Yeah, but I thought that too. I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, well, I don't know.
well,
You don't look like Conan the Barbarian or He-Man or
right,
these other dudes that you probably should look like. That was always how I thought of it.
right.
I still loved it. I still watched it, but I was always a little taken aback by kind of how flabby they looked. How much like my dad they looked without the beer gut.
George the Animal Steel, give him a little hair. He looks just like my dad. What the hell? King Kong Bundy, George the Animal Steel, Ric Flair, none of them had impressive physiques, but they were believable bad guys, but at the same time, they're just somebody you love to hate. And if they can do the job and make Hulk Hogan look good in his victories, that's all people needed to go home happy after the show. And so I again, after I saw that match live, I appreciated them. I thought it was awesome. It was a good match. They're both good wrestlers. It was bragging rights that I saw these big names, but I was a little underwhelmed that I didn't get to see two big buff guys wrestle because they were the ones that I thought were more important by default. And in hindsight, I don't feel the same now. I've grown up a little bit since the '90s, just a little bit, and I appreciate Ric Flair a little bit more now. I used to think he was so one-dimensional and just so hack and just for old people. Um, he's a student of the game. He genuinely loves wrestling with all of his heart. His very first ever wrestling match was in the state of Wisconsin. It was somewhere up north. I should have written down where and when it was, but it was a very long time ago. His first match was in Wisconsin. He technically had a wrestling career for 50 years. I mean, the last 10 or 20 of those years, he didn't wrestle very much, but he was still considered active.
He still pops up on Twitter all the time.
Yeah,
He's still out there.
W Wrestling. Ric Flair has appeared on their weekly show as recently as in the last month or two.
Mm.
He's still out there. And he had his retirement match about a year ago, but he's also gone on record as saying he feels like he might still have one more in him and he might try to wrestle one more time. I think he's like 77.
Yeah,
His
he's
retirement
ancient.
his retirement match was a tag team match, so he had a reason to not have to do as much.
Mm.
So if he does one more match, it's going to be another one of those. But even in the '90s, I'm like Ric Flair, I'm like, why does he have this much hype? Like this much high caliber hype for the fact that like you said flabby. I'm just like his skin has like no elasticity. And then he continued to wrestle for 20 years after that. That elasticity issue only got worse. I'm like, I thought WWE was all about aesthetically pleasing figures to make their show appealing to normies and casual viewers. If I wasn't a wrestling fan and I'm channel surfing because I'm bored in the '90s and I come across Ric Flair and every time he gives you his chop and goes woo, you see his like underarm flab like swaying in the wind and he's not even fat, he's just flabby, I would have changed the channel because I was a body shamer. I was horrible.
I just think it's weird how much you're sitting here talking about how you need your men to look a certain way.
I mean,
I don't know. I never thought of it. I honestly never thought
it's
of
a
it.
wrestling fan
It's
thing. Maybe
something
you
I
wouldn't understand.
noticed. It's something I've noticed as a kid. Again, comparing them to somebody like He-Man.
Right.
But that's as far as I ever went with it. I never really dwelled on it or anything.
Yeah, back back then I was always like, why isn't the British Bulldog the champion? He's like the biggest and the buffest. His his muscles were just tree trunks. I'm like, this guy's insane. This guy should be champion. He only ever got to be the secondary, like the Intercontinental champion. He was never a world champion.
Yeah, but now we know it's because wrestling is fake. And that's why he was never champion. It's all just a soap opera.
It's fake, which none of us knew until recently, right?
Well,
Um now Ric Flair, I've come to respect him more over the years. I realize he's a student of the game. He loves wrestling with all of his heart. And I've just listened to him talk about wrestling. The way he talks about it, you could tell. You can tell that it's his whole life and it's his heart and soul. And he's an interesting storyteller too. It's just he's a pretty cool guy, all things considered.
do you
And
think people in the internet age have more of an appreciation for guys like him and what they do than they would have back in the 90s?
different appreciation. Not necessarily more or less, but different. Yeah, I think.
Just because people understand what they do more.
Yeah,
Like they
kayfabe is dead, as
understand
they
the
say,
idea of his character more.
and how he lives it to some degree. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, definitely. Certain kinds of appreciation are bigger now that people have the internet and they can actually talk about this and see documentaries on them, see YouTube videos about them. Um, Roddy Piper, I I liked him more than Ric Flair. Again, not an impressive physique, not the biggest, not the buffest, passable. Whenever he feuded with Hogan, it was kind of weird because Hogan was just so much bigger than him. And I'm just like, we all know who's going to come out on top in this rivalry, you know? But Piper was interesting. He had that kind of loose cannon thing going on for him. And as a kid, I always thought he was kind of scary. You never knew what he was going to do next. I was actually a little bit uncomfortable sometimes when I would watch him like do Piper's Pit and start to throw a fit about something and hit Superfly Jimmy Snuka in the head with a coconut. And I'm like, ooh, that was loud. I think he actually hit him like hard like that. He made me uncomfortable because I was 10 years old and I liked my wrestling to be not necessarily predictable and cookie cutter to like Hulk Hogan degrees, but like at least believable and structured. And
I feel like the way you're talking about the wrestlers is the same way somebody would be talking about their Pamela Anderson poster. You know what I
oh my
mean?
god,
It's the same thing. It's like, I mean, she doesn't have quite the tits that you want to see on a lifeguard supermodel, but they're fine. I mean, they could act as good buoys in a drowning situation. But
okay.
Carmen Electra's boobs,
I
they're definitely more firm and
I was going to argue that wrestling had lore and layers and these booby posters didn't, but now that you're mentioning that they can serve as flotation devices, that is an added layer that I was not previously appreciating about the booby posters.
yeah,
You got me there.
but the physiques don't have anything to do with the lore. The lore is just the story.
The physiques of the guys in wrestling was all about credibility
If
for
somebody
me.
knew enough about Pamela Anderson's character that they could actually tell you about her story, wasn't she just discovered at like a football game or something like that? It was like a college football game. It's like she has backstory.
Wasn't
That's kind of interesting.
Pamela Anderson was the Tool Time girl for the first season of Home Improvement? I thought that was kind of where she.
But she was discovered
Oh, but
in
okay,
the audience of a college football game.
okay,
And she was a Baywatch girl and she was in Tool Time and all
yeah.
this other stuff. If you have a Pamela Anderson poster and you have all that lower, then how is that any different than what you're talking about right now?
I'll think about that and get back to you.
Uh, you should have a ready answer ready to go. Because I don't know, man. I think it's all the same shit.
So Roddy Piper kind of freaked me out. He wasn't necessarily my favorite because of
He was
both.
one of my favorites. I liked him a lot.
No, I thought he was entertaining, but he was never going to break through to that top echelon of my favorite favorites, just because his unpredictable nature kind of freaked me out a little bit. And there were so many other wrestlers to choose from, you know. But as
Wasn't
time
Hacksaw Jim Dugan? Wasn't he like crazy too? He was a crazy guy.
he was crazy dopey, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the same thing, but
He wasn't a berserker.
yeah, yeah. Well, he wasn't a berserker. He wasn't a King Kong Bundy. Who were some of the other loony ones? The Bastion Booger, uh, some kooky guys back in the '90s, some real characters. Um, over the years, I came to learn more about Roddy Piper, and he he went on to have a career. You know, he did the movie They Live, which was like 1988, 89, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And then
That's probably what he's most famous for. Because the conspiracy people on Twitter like to reference that movie a lot.
right, and I
It's not
see
a good movie, by the way. It's a shitty movie.
the fight scenes are pretty bad. I know that.
Everything's
um, he was Roddy Piper was in It's Always Sunny. He had a semi-reoccurring
yeah,
character
yeah.
on that.
Yep.
He
So he's out there too a lot. Yeah. I
yeah,
guess I never realized it until just now.
he got his fingers into Hollywood a little bit. And then WWE did that show called Legends House, which was a one season, mini series where they had like 10 of those old guys from back in the 80s and 90s wrestling days. They got together in like 2013, 2014 and just like lived in a house together for a whole summer and
Did
they
they
filmed.
wrestle?
They did not
Oh,
wrestle.
what? Come on.
I think a couple of them actually got into some tiffs and they scrapped a little bit, but no
Mm,
wrestling matches. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was part of that too.
mm.
And man, watching Roddy Piper. By the way, he died in summer of 15 of cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest as a result of hypertension.
Well, yeah.
So I'm not shocked. A lot
It's
of people aren't
well, it's
shocked.
it's cardiac arrest a lot with these guys.
Right?
But come on,
I
it's the shit they were shooting up back then.
Yeah, roids with Piper, probably not, but other stuff, yeah, very well could have been. Very well could have been other stuff. Uh, Uppers, whatever other performance enhancers. Maybe roids. Uh,
I feel like they all did that. That was just a way to come like if you weren't doing it, you were definitely not going to get on TV.
that's true, but I mean, Piper was nowhere near as big as like the Legion of Doom or Hogan or anything like that. So
Mm.
but yeah. So he he died in 15 of cardiac arrest. This Legends House thing was filmed a year or two before that, and you can see he's slowing down. I mean, he's what, mid 60s at this point, something like that.
Mm.
And just there's a certain something about him that makes you say like, "Ooh, he's not in the best health these days. He's kind of got to take it easy." Like, and he would talk about that on the show. And wouldn't you know it, I'm glad we got that show. I'm glad we got that show and we got that chance to kind of see see what he had to say in retrospect about his wrestling career and his life on that show. Um, it was that show, Wrestling House. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, dude, watch it. It's some of the best television I've ever seen. It's very compelling. Uh,
Wrestling House is what it's called.
Legends House,
Legends
Legends
House.
House. If you can't find it, I can hook you up with it. Um, I'll never forget on the last episode, there was this moment when Piper is in a car heading to some sort of meeting where they're all going to be talking about stuff. And for whatever reason, he randomly said to the cameraman, and this was like out of context, it was apropos of nothing. He said the phrase, "I'm just used to 80,000 people trying to stab me." And then he shrugged. For whatever reason, that really, really resonated with me. And as time passed by, I'm like, I think that's a metaphor for just like how he handled life. Just kind of be a bad guy, but don't care. Don't let it get to you too much. But maybe the stress of living like that makes you kind of paranoid, or maybe the stress and the paranoia of living like that kind of eats away at you, is what I'm trying to say. Do you get what I'm getting at here? Like, and the reason he said
Do
that,
people not know wrestling is fake still? Because why would that even be an issue?
it,
It's like watching a movie with a bad guy and then going and stabbing him in real life because of what he did in the movie. That doesn't make any sense to me.
a lot of people who went to live wrestling shows in the 80s did not realize consciously that it was fake. And it might have been one of those things where he just like
Yeah, but there
never,
was a moment in time when people thought it was real.
yeah, yeah,
As a kid, I would ask people if it was real, adults, and most of them would just be like, I don't know.
yeah.
But others would be like, oh yeah, for sure, it's
Oh,
got
yeah, a
to be.
lot of people can't
But
wait to tell you.
nobody knew for sure.
Yeah.
But nowadays, everybody knows.
But I think it's one of those things where maybe it just kind of traumatized him. Maybe it's got to be crazy. He headlined the first WrestleMania ever. The first WrestleMania,
I know I saw it, but I don't remember. Yeah,
1980, maybe four, 1983, 84, or 85,
we
somewhere in
watched
that
it
time
on
frame.
VHS tape.
WrestleMania 1, the main event was Hogan and Mr. T versus Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul
Yeah, see, I
Orndorff.
remember all that shit. I know we watched it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
And
didn't watch it in 84. This would have been way late 80s, but
Piper was in the vast majority of the first 10 WrestleManias, and some of them did have crowds of 80,000 people. WrestleMania 3 did. That's when Hogan slammed Andre. The
mm,
slam heard around the world. Little kids losing their shit because they couldn't believe that their hero picked up the 500-pound guy and body slammed him. Um, And
That's what
then
you get for eating your Hulkamaniac vitamins.
and then WrestleMania 6, Hogan versus Warrior. What a big deal that was. That one was also had to have been like 70,000 people that were in attendance for that one.
Mhm.
Roddy Piper wrestled at that WrestleMania too, and the majority of the time he was a bad guy. So it's 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 just a mentality. It's just a thing where you never know when Vince is going to say, "Okay, I'm going to switch you to a good guy. Oh, I'm going to switch you back to a bad guy now." Piper has to get in that mode of reminding himself, "Oh, everyone's going to hate me now again." And he's just a weird guy, you know what I mean? Like I guess the point I'm getting at is he was odd, he had some problems, he was a bit of an outlier. As time went on, I came to realize like, man, if me and Piper went to high school together, well, I won't say he and I would have been friends because he would have been that guy who wasn't friends with anyone. But he would have been that
He had the booby posters on his wall. You don't hang out with people like that. He definitely would have had Carmen Electra up on his wall.
he would have been that loner troublemaker who would cross paths with me and my group of friends every now and then and been like, "Hey, what's up?" You know, chatted for a little bit,
Mm.
but then remembered like, "Oh, wait, I don't like people. That's right," and then ran away. You know what I mean? Like I actually went to high school with a guy like that. Um, I don't know if I want to say his name. I'll just uh I'll just say he was a very intense fellow, and I in my head I keep comparing him to Roddy Piper because they both had that penchant for chaos and not caring if their intensity gets them into trouble. And yeah, I've come to realize over the years Piper was an outlier. He was anti. That's what he meant by when as soon as you think you know the answers, I change the questions. Like he was about he was about being different and being divergent. And I'm like, man, in hindsight, this guy should have been my favorite wrestler like from day one. I should have just gotten over my lacking comfort level of thinking that his chaos was a little bit scary. He should have been my favorite wrestler from day one. And now I have bought a Roddy Piper wrestling figure, and he is totally going on the wall underneath Weird Al there, so everyone can see him every single week.
Wait, put that up again. Let's see it. Where'd you get that? Have you just been holding on to that since
I
when
acqu-
was that? Is that like a newer thing?
it's a new line of wrestling figures that is a throwback to the style of the old style of wrestling
Mm.
figures. So this is
Yeah,
probably
we
only
used to have some of those toys.
right. They were that exact same size and shape. Oh, I had a bunch, and oh, Jake the Snake, $1 Million Man. They came with the little rubber accessories. And I got that from Ringside Collectibles on Black Friday. Anyways, and I've never owned a Roddy Piper T-shirt. I've always meant to get one, but I would start to ask myself, do I want the traditional classic hot rod, or do I want something different? And then as I'm trying to make up my mind, I forget, and then I just don't order one. But I need to put that on my to-do list to get a Roddy Piper T-shirt
It's
because
got to be skin tight, just like his t-shirts.
they were. He was he made a guest appearance on the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. That's another Hollywood related, you know, getting into the industry, getting his name out there kind of thing. He was on Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. Again, we're talking about something from the late 80s, but I'm just mentioning it quick anyways. What's funny is that that show lasted a year or two and he was consistently the main bad guy of the cartoon. But during those 2 years, he shifted between being a good guy and a bad guy and his actual wrestling job. So it probably confused some viewers and it was inconsistent. But but still, he his character made that cartoon a lot more interesting. And the last thing, I think this is the last thing I'm going to mention about all of this is 1990. Now this was the 90s. 1990 leading into WrestleMania. He had in the 80s he had been doing really big important matches with guys like Hulk Hogan and stuff. And now he was going into WrestleMania wrestling a halfway important match against a guy named Bad News Brown. And I don't think Piper really cared. And I think him and Bad News Brown were on bad terms with each other in real life.
Nobody cared about Bad News Brown.
And
I don't think, as
and
kids anyway. Did you?
no,
No.
I no, he was just a very one-dimensional bad guy
Yeah,
and never got any kind of meaningful push on TV, so I didn't know why I should care about him. And he was an African American gentleman, and for whatever reason, Piper decided, without telling anybody, right before his WrestleMania match started that he was going to paint his body half black down the middle. Not like skin tone of a black person black, but like pitch black paint. Down Google it, you'll find pictures right away. Why did he do that? Nobody really knows. It's just him being insane again. I guess he thought it would add more of an interesting dynamic to a match that he probably figured no one would care about. And then the match ended up
So he wanted all of his matches to be memorable and important in some way.
I think so. When you're in the wrestling biz, you don't want to lose momentum. You don't you know what I mean? Like Hulk Hogan was the king of that. He was horrible about being so afraid of losing his momentum that he stifled other people from going up the ladder because he was afraid they'd take his spot. Every wrestler has that to some degree. I'm sure Piper had that a little bit. The match ended in a double countout, which at a big show like WrestleMania, that's pretty dissatisfying for the viewers. I have to wonder I had to wonder, like, oh, is it because like whoever was slated, maybe Piper was slated to win, but when the bosses saw him come out unexpectedly with that quote unquote, if you want to call it blackface, they're like, okay, we need to make sure he doesn't win because we have to let him know this isn't okay. Um, in interviews
Did
subsequently,
they care about blackface back then? I feel like people were just more like, who cares?
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it was a different time, so a lot of people were like, who cares? But I mean, obviously, some people were still like, "Hey, that's fucked up." I think. Anyways, in
But it was
subsequent,
half his whole body, though. It wasn't like his face either, which is weird.
yeah, it was because Piper was weird. And anyways, in interviews, it was eventually revealed that neither guy was willing to get pinned by the other guy, which is wrestling confuses me sometimes because it's like if your boss tells you, "Hey, this guy's winning, this guy's losing," you have to listen to your boss, right? But sometimes there's more to it than that. And if Piper was like a legacy guy, maybe he had enough pull to say, I'm not going to lose if I don't want to, kind of thing.
That's why nobody bothered getting chiseled and getting in shape because they're like, this is all dictated by a script anyway. Who gives a shit?
Maybe, yeah. No, again, wrestling is weird, and I'm weird for liking wrestling. But what can I say? It's an ongoing story, and something about that I like. I like the ongoing story aspect. I love the fact that stuff that's happening on weekly WWE wrestling today is directly or at least vaguely connected to stuff that happened 5, 10, even 40 years ago. It's one big story. It's kind of
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah. It's like a soap opera.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah,
That's all
absolutely.
it
It's
is.
a soap opera.
But when I found out for sure that wrestling was fake, that's when I just kind of lost all interest in it. I had just no desire to watch. And I was probably 14 ish, 13, 14. Like when we were kids, we watched it all the time. It was always on Saturday morning. It was great, but uh, if it's fake, who cares? That's
And my ex-wife used to bust on me for that same thing. She's like, it's fake. Why like something that's dumb and fake? It's like number one,
yeah, but it's still that's the same with every single thing that you're watching anyway. It's all fake. It's all scripted.
I was gonna say, I would tell her it's the fiction that I enjoy.
Yeah,
A lot of people like Marvel movies or whatever it might be. That's all
sure.
fiction too. Yeah, but this she was bothered. My ex was bothered by the fact that s- if wrestling is something that some people to this day mistakenly believe is real, she's afraid that our mutual friends might think that I was one of them who was dumb enough to still think that it was real. And she didn't like the idea of being married to a guy that people might thinks it's real.
That would have been really funny if somebody would have thought that. The thing is,
I can laugh about that now, sure.
but I would be somebody who leaned into it and be like, do I think it's real? What do you mean? What do you mean it's real? Yeah, they're out there, they're wrestling, they're actually like sweating and touching each other and bleeding. Like, what are you talking about? And I would just lean into trying to be one of those guys that thought it was real.
So I guess in closing, I just want to say that if Piper died of a heart attack, maybe it was more like Piper died of a broken heart because so many fans in the 90s, like me, were such horrible body shamers that we didn't appreciate him enough for the value that he did have, and it was just never enough, and it stressed him out. Maybe I killed Roddy Piper. Maybe I have to live with that for the rest of my life.
You should. You definitely did.
You know?
He's dead because of you.
Also, P.S. How the hell is Ric Flair still alive? Ask
He's got the magic yell. That's what keeps him alive.
ask anybody who knows anything at all about Ric Flair, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, that guy's still alive."
You don't.
How?
It's like Keith Richards. It's the same thing. Some people are just blessed with longevity no matter what they throw at themselves.
Yeah. Um.
Did you bring in this topic because I was bringing in my next topic?
No, I
Did
brought
you kind of let that inform, or did this all just work out exactly?
it all worked out this way. I got inspired to bring in this topic because it started out with the Bob story, the wrestling show, which was almost exactly this time of year. And I'm like, oh yeah, Royal Rumble, Ric Flair. It was the first live wrestling show I ever went to, and it was in the '90s. I should bring that in for Mindful '90s.
All right. I'm not going to say too much about this because I'm really going to try to keep the podcast under. And I think I probably did most of the talking on the last one, the one that ran like, and they were both Tanya Harding subjects.
Sir,
Like, who knew?
last week I think you talked about Tanya Harding more than Tanya Harding's ever talked about herself, if I'm being honest.
Definitely more than most, just about anybody's talked about her.
You were inspired by that athletic ass. You wanted to give her tribute, and I can
No,
understand that.
inspired by somebody I can identify with and relate with from the world of white trash, getting as far as she did.
Okay,
That was pretty amazing.
you did reiterate that point as much as you
God
reiterated
dang
your love
that
for her ass.
ass.
Yeah, yeah,
That
exactly.
ass was something else.
Yep.
Anyway, when you're a kid on the bus, you have all kinds of stupid conversations, such as whether or not Bruce Lee could beat up a ninja, or who would win in a fight, Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee.
A ninja or a Viking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Stuff like that.
it was a never-ending debate that went on forever and ever and ever in the 90s. And I think a lot of what came out of those school bus conversations back then actually translated into the real world. For instance, Freddy versus Jason. We talked about that endlessly as kids. Who would win in a fight, Freddy versus Jason?
Yeah.
Of course, they made movies out of it later on.
Took them long enough.
Now, here's something that happened in the 90s, which I was surprised to find out this actually came about in the 90s. I thought this had been around for a long time and we only discovered it in the 90s, but I guess it was actually created and founded in the 90s. That is the UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you don't know anything about UFC, this is what happens when everybody recognizes that boxing is just for elitist pussies and that wrestling is for children. UFC is for men who want to see a real fight between men or women in later years, but it started off with men. That's what made this so amazing. Now, we discovered the UFC at a video store, I want to say around 95 ish. And we watched, it was UFC 1. Apparently, this had been founded in 1993, which kind of blew me away. I thought this shit was going on since like the 70s. And then it just kind of came to light that they were doing this shit in the 90s and they decided to make videos out of it. Well, turns out that this was actually a production. They pulled, I want to say 8 fighters altogether. I'm kind of going a little bit on memory. The thing is, what was interesting about it was how shocking it was for teenage kids watching this kind of fighting style. You rent this, and it's no holds barred, anything goes, no time limits, no weight classes, no nothing. You can pull hair and I remember a UFC which came after this because obviously when we watched the first one we got addicted to it.
Mhm.
But I think it was like UFC 4 or 5. There was actually a fight going on where one dude had another dude pinned against the chain link fence, and he's literally just giving like punches, full on punches to the guy's dick. And I
Oh,
remember watching this as a
oh,
kid and being like, oh my God, what is going on here? UFC 1 was the beginning of all that. We watched a guy come in there and like we didn't know what to expect. First of all, it has this really gritty kind of look to it. It's
Mhm.
got this old uh even for the 90s, this old kind of film look to it.
like bum fights? No.
Not, maybe grittier than even bum fights.
Okay.
It did not have any of the flash that wrestling has on TV. It has none of the glitz, it had none of the lights and the girls in bikinis and all the things that you see in like a boxing match, a televised boxing match, or wrestling, or even like any sporting event at all.
So there was no guy with face paint talking to an interviewer about firing up the rocket fuel with the power of the warriors?
No,
No.
not
Well,
not in the early days.
well, then how should we know that we're supposed to be excited for
And
this?
that was the other thing. There was no good guys or bad guys. These are literally just dudes who think that they're tough enough to get into a ring with another guy with their particular martial
I
art
was going to say,
and take on another guy of another martial art.
they all had different fighting styles.
Yes. So in UFC 1, there was like a karate guy, there was a sumo guy, there was a kickboxer.
Wasn't the
There
main
was
event like Hoist Gracie versus a sumo guy of
no, no, no,
UFC 1?
no, it was Shamrock. Ken Shamrock,
Ken
was that his
Ken
name?
Shamrock? Yeah.
Ken Shamrock.
Okay.
That was the main event in that. Here's what happens with the UFC. Everything about this was new and just blew everybody away.
Yeah.
First of all, there's the grittiness. Second of all, there is the commentary. The people giving commentary to the video in real time as this is happening, and they all suck. Like they were very obviously not professionals who were coming out of boxing or somewhere else.
Yeah.
These are just some random guys that they picked. There was a chick who was a kickboxer who was one of the commentators, some guy that I never heard of before, some idiot who mispronounced all the names and didn't know what he was talking about half the time, had really bad banter. I don't remember the guy's name. And then there was Jim Brown, the football player, the former football player.
Okay.
That was the three commentators.
Crazy.
Not very good. Not very good.
Very ragtag.
So when you're getting pumped to watch something like this, when you rent something like this from the video store, you think you are going to take this home and watch a fighting scene kind of along the lines you see in a karate movie, where it's like block, punch, kick, block, and
Spin
just
kick.
in super fast motion. That's what you thought you were getting into. Turns out, real fighting isn't like that at all. So, one of the first matches was the sumo guy and the karate guy. Karate guy uh, punches the sumo guy enough times to put him on the ground. The guy falls to the ground and he fucking kicks the guy like right in the face. And a tooth like pops out of this guy's head and goes flying.
Wow.
And that was the big topic of conversation with the commentators. They're just like, wow, this guy went down and, he kicked him in the face. But you know what? That's UFC rules. No holds barred. There's nothing. But the ref actually jumped in and stopped it after this guy took a couple kicks to the face because now he's like bleeding all over the place. He's got teeth all over the place. And the ref steps in, stops it, and the commentators are just like, hey, I don't know if the ref should be doing that. This is against the rules. He should have the option of either getting his ass knocked out or
Tapping out.
tapping out.
Yeah.
Those are the only rules. Anything besides that, but the ref broke it up. And so there's all this back and forth going on. As teenagers, we're just like, what the fuck is this is fucking amazing. We have never seen anything like this before in our lives. This is what fighting should be about. This is what man versus man should be all about. The next match, a lot more of the same. The karate guy, I think he ended up like breaking his hand. The other thing that happened that was very interesting is you have to fight your way to the final match. You don't get to just fight a guy and then wait a few days and recoup and then go fight somebody else.
You mentioned it was 8 fighters, so it was a tournament?
Yeah, it was a tournament.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think there was 8. Maybe there was like 10. I don't remember. But you fight a guy and all the guys fight. So you only get to rest as long as it takes for everybody else to fight. So if you're the first in line, if you're the first match, that's the best position to be in because you get the longest to rest before you have to go in
True
there
story,
and
yeah.
fight the next guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, it goes through all of these guys. They fight each other. They end up winning or losing, and they can go on to the next one. Comes down to Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie. Obviously, Gracie is famous by this point. And this is where we learned for the first time that kickboxing and karate and all of these other martial arts are fucking bullshit.
They ain't got
What
shit.
matters is jujitsu.
Jujitsu, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
What matters is taking your opponent down and being able to grapple him into submission.
Yeah.
This is the first time we saw anything like this. Again, no holds barred. And this is the guy who fucking win. It's not the kickboxer. It's not the sumo guy. The sumo guy's he's got all the girth. You would think that he has all of the advantage because he outweighs everybody by 200 pounds. Not the case. Now, I would have liked to see him take on Hoist Gracie. That would have been interesting. He went out right away. But in sumo, you're not used to taking kicks to the face. Yeah, you're kind of tapping out pretty early. The guy who broke his hand, he ended up winning his next match too with his fucking broken hand.
Oh,
that
wow.
was another thing that
Wow.
blew us away at the time. We're like, holy shit, it doesn't matter how beat up you are. You get in the octagon. The octagon was kind of a cool thing too. That was a little divergence from the boxing ring or the wrestling ring or anything else. Come to find out, they set it up that way on purpose. The octagon with the chain link was part of the aesthetic for this new fighting tournament that they were going to try to make into this big thing. So we were absolutely floored by this. This is UFC 1. We saw it, like I said, probably a couple years after it came out because we thought it was brand new at the time. So maybe the video store got it, had just gotten it because we hadn't seen it there before. So maybe they had just gotten it, but the very first one was in 93. So
Okay.
this was a couple years afterwards. But yeah, we were just like, holy shit, this is the most amazing thing we have ever seen before. And my feeling at the time of watching this was this is going to essentially create an entirely new fighting style. It has to, because the only way you're going to survive is if you adopt the fighting styles that work in a real world fighting situation and you just push away all of the bullshit that kung fu and taekwondo and kickboxing and Tai Bo or whatever bullshit fighting people were doing back then. None of it mattered. What it all came down to was, can you take a guy down and make him submit to your will? That's all that mattered. Now, there's backstory to this. That was my exposure to it in the 90s.
Before you get into that, how long was the main event? Gracie versus Shamrock. Was it quick?
It was pretty quick.
Yeah.
The other thing about the UFC that made it pretty interesting is that all of these matches were fucking fast.
Yeah.
They went by quick. It did not take long. And this really does simulate real world fights.
Right.
If you watch real fights on, YouTube or Twitter, the shit is over in 2 seconds.
Right. Ronda Rousey has won a bunch of matches just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how most of these are. Now, some of them went on multiple minutes, but whatever. Didn't matter. I think the longest match might have been just over 5 minutes. And that was a lot of dancing around and
showboating.
Yeah, whatever. So they had a boxer was one of the guys in there too. And I think their match might have been the longest. These guys were completely gassed after like 30, 40 seconds because they threw everything they had at each other. And then the rest of the match was who's just going to be able to pop the guy just enough to sap his last remaining molecule of energy. That's what it came down to.
The opposite of the Mayweather strategy.
Yeah, yeah. So these guys burned themselves out immediately, and then the rest of the match was just them obviously just wanting to die on their feet.
Yeah.
So fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So
And new.
yeah, brand new.
Yeah.
And of course, like I said before, we were addicted to this, and we, would go to the video store and say, "Hey, when do you get the new UFC in? We would demand this," as teenagers. And they did. They brought in some other ones. I think I saw the first 5 or 6 of them
Okay.
before they started to get to be pretty big pay-per-view events. And that was I would say like mid-aughts, 2006, 2007, 2008, like kind of in there is when UFC got really big.
In the like George St. Pierre days.
Yeah, yeah. When it got to the point where you could go to a buddy's house and he had put down the $70 for
The
the
pay-per-view.
right.
Yeah.
So that was not the 90s. We were renting the shit on VHS. That's how we discovered it, completely by accident.
Yep.
Obviously, Hoist Gracie was a big name. He was in the first, I want to say 4 or 5 of them. He missed one kind of in the middle, if I remember right. I don't think he was in like the third one, or maybe again, this is all off of 20-year-old memory that's been obliterated between alcohol and underneath alcohol and drugs. So don't take my word for it. Absolutely stunning. What I found out later on is that Hoist Gracie wasn't just somebody who made a name for himself with jujitsu in those early days of the UFC and became the first hero of the UFC, the first fan favorite. But his family actually everybody knows this now, okay? Everybody who follows UFC knows this now. The family, the
The
Gracie
Gracie
family,
family.
were
Yeah.
known for developing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Gracie himself comes from a family where he had like 9 brothers and 5 sisters or something. So apparently, Pa Gracie, he was the sperminator, and
Yeah.
his jujitsu was keeping that thing going. But here is the real connection between them and the UFC. Not just that they were superstars and made a name for because to them it was about making a name for their specific brand of jujitsu and making that famous. That's what the UFC was all about. However, they were doing this long before the UFC. Apparently, their academy, which had been going since the 70s, had been inviting martial artists from all over the world to come and try and take them on. They had been doing this for like a decade before the UFC ever came, probably a decade and a half before the UFC ever came along. So they were world renowned for bringing in these martial artists from all over the world of all disciplines and absolutely destroying these guys in their academy. So much so that they actually started making videos of it. And I don't remember what the name of the video series was, but they started distributing these videos all over the world saying, "Look, here's a Kung Fu master who came in. We completely wasted him using our brand of jujitsu." And then it didn't take long before some American business guy by the name of Art Davie gets involved. And he says, "Hey, why don't we make this a big sporting thing?" And of course, got the Gracies involved because he got the idea from them making this video.
Yeah.
So their involvement was not entirely based on the fact that they are just very good martial artists. They were doing this beforehand. So what happens is they put on this big spectacle. It's successful enough. Obviously, it takes a while for these things to get up and running. But they start doing more and more of it. And of course, there's controversy that comes with it because there are no rules. This is,
Yeah.
again, no holds
Okay.
barred
Yeah.
fighting.
Yeah.
John McCain, who was a famous senator who
He was
died not that long ago,
he was the Maverick, right?
he was a fucking pussy and he was no maverick at all. He led the charge against getting UFC banned in as many states as possible. He
I didn't know
was,
that. Boo.
yeah, he was so disgusted by it. Yeah, this is just human cockfighting. Well, that's the fucking point, McCain. That's the point of this.
Consenting adults
Getting,
eat
yes,
shit.
getting people together who want to bash each other's brains in as a spectacle. Who are you to say otherwise? Go back to Vietnam. Go back to that prison camp and stay there
Zing.
where you belong. Anyway, he leads the charge. He gets 36 other states to ban this shit, and the UFC caves. And slowly they start implementing all these rules. They start putting time limits on things. They start saying, you can't do the really cool dick punches that everybody saw in UFC 4 or 5 or whenever that was. Can't do that anymore. Can't pull hair anymore. I don't remember seeing a lot of that happen anyway. I don't remember hair pulling, but oh God, that dick punch. Oh, like how do you see that as a teenager and not just be like, "Oh my god"?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That sticks with you. Anyway, they start implementing rules until it finally becomes what we have today, which is nothing like it was in
Of
the early
course.
days.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gloves were another thing that they implemented. So when you watch UFC today, the fighters have gloves. They didn't have that in the early days. This is all, and hell, when you're watching the video, you can hear that sick smack of somebody's fist making contact with a face. It's gross. It's such a disgusting sound. They took all of that stuff away. But they wanted to make it a legitimate sport. And I guess that's what it's become. What I knew at the time as a kid, where it was going to basically create this new fighting style, which is just kind of a conglomeration of all these fighting styles coming together.
Right.
They were going to have to develop a fighting style. And we know it today as MMA, as mixed martial arts.
Bellator, UFC, others, pride fighting, something.
All of that came about as a result of this, as a result of the UFC coming in and basically showing everybody you're not just getting by on your kung fu skills.
Right. Yeah.
That's all bullshit. Okay.
That's for the movies. Yeah.
It's all for the movies. In a real world fighting situation, it doesn't stand up. Mixed martial arts is what you now have to train in if you want to be successful in the UFC. The UFC is a shadow of what it once was. I think that old school knockdown, drag out, no holds barred shit is pretty much the purest form of fighting you can do. But whatever. It's a sport now. In the 90s, it was not. It was brutality.
Yeah.
Just raw brutality. That was shocking to everybody, myself and John McCain, former prisoner of war John McCain, who should have never been let out. The difference was I looked at this as, oh my God, I can't fucking believe these guys are doing this shit to each other. And not only that, the guys who did UFC 2, they saw UFC 1, they knew what they were getting into, and they still stepped into the ring to subject themselves to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fuck all the politicians that tried to get in the way of that. They're the reason that the original vision of the UFC is no more. And that it's just kind of like another spectator sport, which is fine. It's still good. It's still fun to watch. These guys are athletes. Many of them are ripped, unlike WWF wrestlers or WWC wrestlers or whatever. These are the guys that belong on your wall with their beautiful cut physiques.
Hey, man, I, I've, ha- I've known
10-year-old Andy goes to a UFC fight. He's not having these same thoughts about, he's kind of, he's kind of flabby and small. I wish he was bigger. But again,
that's a good point. I know what you're saying. That's a good
these
point.
guys are they definitely look better than a lot of the wrestlers
If Ric
that were
Flair's
going out at the same time.
if Ric Flair's repeated cock punches are enough to make his opponent submit, then he's the man, and it doesn't matter how flabby he is.
Yeah.
Because
And it doesn't, and you know what? You can sit there and talk all day about how kind of a bitch move that is to just repeatedly punk. And like he hit the guy like 20 times, like right in the dick. Like it was just endless, endless.
I would have tapped out after one.
Any guy watching that is only seeing that in slow motion. It was horrifying. It truly was. In that moment, I could almost see what John McCain was bitching about. Uh,
Almost.
no, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
you still let the guys do it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my last topic of the night. UFC, which came about in the 90s. Again, I thought this started way earlier. I didn't know it was specifically a 90s thing. I had no idea. So that exposed us to what real fighting looked like. And like I said, I was already out of wrestling by that time,
Yeah.
but I was all in on that. That was just absolutely amazing. So
I get it. I get the wrestling haters who are like, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's not real.
nope.
But we've already discussed
Yeah, but
it's
it doesn't matter.
fiction,
It
and
doesn't
maybe it's
matter.
the fiction you enjoy.
But it was the fighting that I liked. It was the fighting aspect that I got into as a kid.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, but I have to mention, like, there have been mixed martial artists and boxers who have dabbled with wrestling,
Sure.
and they're like, wow, we do appreciate what you guys do. In certain ways, it's more dangerous. In certain ways, you have to
Well, yeah.
have a better gas tank.
Yeah.
Some of these guys have to wrestle for a half hour,
Yep.
or even
Yep.
an hour if it's an Iron
Yeah.
Man
Anybody
match.
who says that it's not, it takes no athleticism to do that are just stupid.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
really are.
Man, it's sort of
But
fighting.
none of these wrestlers are lasting in the octagon. Hell no.
Well, Brock Lesnar and
Well,
Jake Hager, some the vast majority of them, absolutely, the vast majority of them. Some of them, though,
I no,
Bobby Lashley, he did okay in UFC
I'm only
and
thinking 90s
MMA.
wrestlers. I'm only
And-
thinking Hulk Hogan, uh, Roddy Piper. He's not going to last in the octagon.
Ken Shamrock went to the WWE right around the turn of the millennium,
So
maybe
this is way after his
maybe
UFC
99.
days.
Yeah, I'd have to double check that, but
Yeah.
yeah, he had to go somewhere.
Like I said, he was in the first main event with Hoist Gracie. It
Yeah.
was those two. I remember that
That's
absolutely.
crazy.
Yep. So that's all I had.
That's all you had. We've got a few minutes. Do we want to recap a little bit
The
this episode or even this month? Like, this is a chance for Corey to get in touch with his emotions. What have you learned? What have you learned about the
over the
90s?
month.
Why not? I, I,
What
I'm
have I
I'm s-
learned about the 90s?
I'm saying let's.
I'm learning a lot of really cool shit became cultural forces later on that began in the 90s. Like the UFC. The UFC is huge.
Your very first topic a month ago was the 90s wasn't that great. Do you still feel the same?
Yeah, in the 90s. Yeah, my whole point was just living in the 90s was just not that great.
Okay.
It's not the heavenly uh thing that people nostalgize.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a word, but
man. I yeah, we this is our it's the last day of the month. We've been doing this for a whole month now. Uh I'm learning a little bit about you, a little bit about myself. Man, everything boils down to just
what are you learning about the topics? That's
oh,
that's the real stuff.
oh, I'm learning stuff about your topics. Absolutely.
No, not my topic, but just topics in general, like yours or mine.
I know so much more now about Tanya Harding than I did before 2 weeks
So
ago.
that's what makes it so great.
Yeah. Um, what do I want to say? It's I was looking for mentorship back then, and I'm still looking for mentorship now. That seems to be one of my more reoccurring themes is who did I look to as role models? That's why I brought up Danny Tanner on like the second or third episode. That's why I'm talking about Ric Flair and Roddy Piper in terms of which one I'm more identified with. That's that was the vast majority of my 90s experience was looking for someone to what's the word I want to say? Emulate, maybe? Be like?
Sure. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm discovering, not discovering, but learning that the kinds of things or people that you looked up to and wanted to emulate are easily 180 degrees from.
Give or take, yeah.
So, like, your TV dad is Danny Tanner, my TV dad is Al
Was
Bundy.
that one?
Yeah. You were really into wrestling. I was as a kid, but then got really into UFC. Like, that was definitely way more my jam later on.
But what did we have in common in the 90s? We were both kind of outliers. We were both, I don't know.
What do we have in common?
Yeah.
We were both poor.
Different.
I think my house was probably a lot more violent and
Yeah.
alcohol fueled than yours probably was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my mom's violence was all head games. It was all guilt trips. Like so bad.
Yeah, and I never had to deal with that. We just got our asses beat a lot.
Is it because your mom wasn't good at it or because you were just impervious to it? Or both?
I think our mom just, I don't know, she never guilt tripped us. She
Just
never,
I can't imagine
I don't know.
growing up not having a mom that
We
guilt
got not
tripped the living shit out of you.
we got slapped around a bit.
I almost wonder which one's worse. You know what I mean? That
What?
that's
Head games are definitely worse.
that's the real ninjas versus Vikings here. Is which which one's worse? Head games or getting slapped all the time?
Getting
L-
getting
li-
slapped around is nothing if
living
you're
in
a.
a constant state of wince, wondering when the next backhand is coming. Like
It is
that's
funny. She
sucks.
would laugh at us every once. She'd like if I remember one time sitting there eating my breakfast cereal and she was sitting right next to me and she made a sudden movement because I think she like dropped something. And immediately I was like, I like threw cereal
I
all
shouldn't
over the
laugh. Yeah.
and
Oh my,
she thought that was funny.
oh my
She
god.
just like laughed about it. She's like, what? You think I'm going to hit you? I'm like, maybe not right this second, but yeah, I think you're going to hit me.
Oof, man.
But for boys, it's not a big deal. We hit each other all the time. So like being hit by how do you think men grow up and can easily take their woman slapping them or beating at them?
Yeah. Which is
Because we got beat when we were kids.
right.
It's not a
Yeah.
big deal.
That's real talk, man, for sure. No cap.
Head games, we never get. I can't identify on the head game level at all.
That
I see it happening. I see the manipulations that are going on, but it would never occur to me to do that to another person.
yeah.
I don't know. Did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. But just when you think you have all the answers, I change the questions, just like my hero Roddy Piper. So stay on your toes for that.
All right.
We got a dialy thing. Don't forget. Oh, that's what you are queuing up.
Oh, I was going to look at these.
Oh yeah, yeah. Do chats first. Absolutely.
Um, the problem with reading these later is that I don't. Magic Man was a legit stud. You're remembering Magic era all wrong. Magic was good.
Oh,
Uh,
Mikowski.
he was mediocre. He was better than other quarterbacks the Packers had, but I really just remember him being mediocre. And like I said, there was that one good season that he had that was 10-6. But if you look at the rest of his career, it's not like in order to be good, you have to put up good wins, I think. So,
Right on.
s- and he says, it's still real to me. Damn it. Wrestling.
Heck yeah, dude.
What's up? All right. Well, you came in right at the end, but we appreciate the chat.
Absolutely. Holla.
All right.
Thanks for showing up. Thanks for
You
watching.
said we had a daily voice. Wait, hold on. Let's see if I did this right.
Yes, the Daily Mail is in response to the booby
Why
posters.
Of the booby posters?
Yeah, the
Okay.
Carmen Electra stuff.
do people buy bikini model posters? Because they want to add some beach vibes to their walls and make
Did you
their
think
room
of
a
beach vibes?
shore thing. These posters are like a wave of inspiration,
Oh,
reminding us to
Jesus.
stay current and strive for our ocean of dreams. So whether you're a
I just now got that this was all puns. It was right.
tidy fan or just like to see some
Hide.
eye-catching artwork, these bikini model posters are definitely making a splash in the market.
Oh, okay.
Damn it, Diley. I
Thanks, Diley.
that was so lame.
It was clever. I liked it. That was really clever. I couldn't have thought of all those
We're
puns.
gonna have a meeting about this
He's right, by the way.
because I think we
If
might
you
have.
had bikini posters in your room, like he obviously did as a kid, you would have all kinds of beach puns too.
I I don't know, man. That was such a lame call in. I think we might have to fire him from his job that we don't pay him for to do call ins. You're on thin ice, Diley. I think we might have to fire you because that was just it was just so lame. We'll have a meeting about it. We'll weigh out the pros and cons.
Diley, you got to send in a voice message next week, making a bunch of puns of why Andy is wrong
Or
and
make
how you're right.
or make an appeal for why you deserve a second chance. Because at this point, I just don't know if you deserve one, man. I don't know. Anywho, um, man, I haven't even given a little bit of a thought to what I'm going to bring in next week. These last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been ready. Something's always been inspiring me to say, "Oh, I know what I'm going to bring in next time." But right now, I have no clue.
Well, you should be on the ball like I am. I got all my topics figured out. I got some lame topics in there though. Some that I just threw in there just to throw in there just
Yeah,
to fill out space, but
you might retool. That's cool.
we'll see. They're just in there so that I can be lazy on any given week and not really have to do
Like
anything.
like Ric Flair being too lazy to go to the gym and try to tone up that body a little bit.
If he was in the UFC, he wouldn't be skipping gym day. That'd be a motivator. All right. Well, can we shut this thing down? Oh Jesus. We went 2 hours again.
Oh,
We're trying to do an hour and a half here.
but we technically started at 7:09, so we went about the same length we did
Well,
last week and the
well,
week before. About the same, 10 minutes shy of 2 hours. You want to get it closer to an hour and a half?
I don't care. I honestly don't care.
All I care about is stop at 9.
I mean,
So
I'm just going to shut this off and freeze for the rest of the night because my fucking boiler doesn't work. So that's all I have to look forward to tonight. And
I
you know what's going to happen too is that the wife is going to be like, "I'm cold," and she's going to. God, I hope she's not watching this.
put that thing on
She's
you
she's
or
not she's
what?
not watching this. She can't be watching this. She's going to complain about how she's cold in bed, and then she's going to put her ice cold feet on me, and it's going to be the worst thing in the world. That is the absolute worst. Oh,
Winter's hard enough. The last thing we need is an ice cold foot
what is wrong with
surprise.
women? Why can't you stay warm? What's going on? Why are you always so ice cold all the time?
Why don't you take her to Al
It'll be the
Bundy's
middle
shoe
of
store?
summer, and her feet'll still be cold.
Ah,
Well, whatever.
anywho, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it a lot.
Yes, we appreciate it. All right. We'll shut this thing down. I will end the stream now. Good to see y'all. We'll be back next week. We'll do more of the same.
I'm doing laundry tomorrow. I'm going to wash a bunch of the 90s shirts. I'm going to let you take a look at what I've got, see if you might want to borrow one or two of them. We'll go from there.
What size are they? Like extra large?
The vast majority of them are size large.
Okay.
Probably a few XLs. I don't remember.
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect.
Okay.
Let's just wear them all between the two of us over the next year. All 285 or whatever the fuck you said you had.
258, give or take.
It's way too many. That's still way too many. All right. Thanks for watching.
Yeah,
See you
thanks.
next week. Later.
Peace.